It's a big day for millions of voters in America as they start heading to polling stations to pick their next president, with the candidates making their last push to win the White House. The world is watching this close race for its potential impact. Just hours before the U.S. election, North Korea fired multiple short-range ballistic missiles this morning over the East Sea, prompting a harsh warning from the South. The country's inflation in October continued to stay in the 1% range, marking the lowest in nearly 4 years. Prices of vegetables, however, sharply rose. It's November 5th, 8 p.m. in Seoul. This is Newscenter. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Min. We start with the latest from the U.S., where millions have started heading to polling stations to pick the country's 47th president. Our Choi Min-jung reports on what the atmosphere is like in the U.S. as voting begins.
Americans are heading to the polls to vote for the country's next president. The small New Hampshire town of Dixville Notch cast the first votes as early as midnight, with Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris and Republican nominee Donald Trump both getting 3 votes each. Elsewhere, polls began to open at 5 a.m. Tuesday morning Eastern Time, starting with Vermont. Security has been tightened around the White House with a 3-meter iron fence. Polling places nationwide are under 24-hour surveillance by the FBI, with National Guard troops on standby. This increased vigilance comes after the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol in 2021, when supporters of former President Donald Trump stormed the building in protest of the 2020 election result. On the eve of the election, Harris and Trump made their final pitches in battleground states. Harris spoke at the last rally of her campaign in Pennsylvania, spreading the message of unity and optimism. She reiterated her promises of lowering living and housing costs, taxes for small businesses, and advocating for abortion rights. And most importantly, Harris said she's ready to become the next president.
We know it is time for a new generation of leadership in America. And I am ready to offer that leadership as the next president of the United States of America.
Trump's final stop was Michigan. He promised to, quote, fix America.
This is all you need to know. I mean, Joe and Kamala broke it, and I will fix it. I'll fix it fast.
Trump stressed his real opponent isn't Harris, but instead an evil Democrat system. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
The U.S. presidential election is not based on the popular vote, but it's based on a system called the Electoral College. Our Park Go-no explains how it works.
The U.S. presidential race is coming to an end. Beginning midnight on November 5th in Dixville Notch, a small village in New Hampshire, the in-person presidential vote will come to a close 25 hours later in Alaska. The U.S. uses the electoral vote instead of a popular vote system. So Tuesday's election is to select the Electoral College, which has a total of 538 votes, made up of 100 senators, 435 congressmen, and 3 electors from Washington, D.C. Democratic candidate Kamala Harris and Republican candidate Donald Trump will need at least 270 votes, also called the magic number, to ensure victory. This means that a candidate with more of the popular vote can still be defeated if they receive fewer Electoral College votes. In 2016, Hillary Clinton lost the election to Trump, although she won around 2.9 million more votes. If Harris and Trump are tied on 269 votes, their fate will be decided by the House of Representatives in early January. The number of Electoral College votes differs by state based on the size of its congressional delegation, with states with bigger populations getting more electoral votes. For example, California, which has the largest population, has a total of 54 electoral votes because California has 2 senators and 52 congressmen, while Wyoming, with the smallest population, has just 3 because it has 2 senators and 1 congressman. Most of the states follow the winner-takes-it-all rule, where the candidate who earns more votes within a state takes the whole electoral college. But Maine and Nebraska split their electoral votes, giving 2 to the state popular vote winner and 1 vote for the winner in each of the state's congressional districts. After the Electoral College is selected, they'll participate in a ceremonial vote on December 17th, while the next U.S. president will be inaugurated on January 20th next year. With the poll results for the past several weeks showing a tight race, particularly in the 7 swing states, including Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia, it remains too close to call. And with the number of variables that could slow the process, including delays in counting mail-in votes as each state verifies tickets at different dates, and a possible recount in the case of a narrow victory, it could be as long as 2 weeks before we see a winner. Pakonu, Arirang News.
As latest polls have been indicating, this presidential race is really deadlocked. For every detail, our Kim Bo-kyung is here in the studio. Welcome, Bo-kyung.
Hi, Jung-min. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. Bo-kyung, so voters just began going to polling station. How many are expected to cast their ballots?
Well, Jung-min, according to the Bipartisan Policy Center, the number of eligible voters for this year's presidential election is estimated to be 244 million. Now, 4 years ago, during the 2020 presidential election, over 2/3 of eligible Americans voted, 66.8% to be exact, according to survey data from the Census Bureau. Now, that was more than 158 million votes, marking the highest voter turnout since 1900, which was 73.2%. If we take a look at the early voting turnout, roughly 82 million people had already cast ballots as of Monday, showing how enthusiastic voters are to choose the next president. It is lower than in 2020, but given that 2020 was the pandemic period, we could still say the figure is still on pace for a historical high compared with other previous years. And this is why experts say projections from early voting indicate that the overall turnout for the election will be probably between 60% and the 2/3 of eligible voters who voted in 2020.
We will definitely have to see how many voters turn out this year. And can you tell us the battleground states and what the latest polls suggests?
Of course. So except for Nebraska and Maine, all the states in the United States follow winners-take-all system, where the candidate who receives the majority of the votes takes all of the state's allocated electoral votes. The Electoral College, consisting of 538 electors, is distributed across America's 50 states and the District of Columbia. This means a candidate must secure at least 270 electoral votes to win the presidential election. And this is why many media outlets say it is the road to 270. Now, based on several reports, Democratic Vice President Kamala Harris has effectively secured 226 electoral votes, while former Republican President Donald Trump has secured 219. The remaining 93 votes from 7 battleground states are crucial in determining the outcome of the election. Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania are grouped as the 3 major battleground states in the Rust Belt region. They were once known for their strong Democratic support, being dubbed the Blue Wall. However, in the 2016 presidential election, former President Donald Trump swept these states, propelled by the strong appeal of his America First policy. While in 2020, Democratic candidate Joe Biden reclaimed them all back again. Meanwhile, Arizona, Nevada, North Carolina, and Georgia are swing states in the Sun Belt, which includes 15 states extending across the southern U.S. from southwest to southeast, and have hotter climates than the northern states. The latest polls are showing a close race between Harris and Trump, with some even contradicting each other's surveys in the 7 battleground states that I just mentioned. For example, final swing state polls from Emerson College and The Hill showed Trump having this edge in Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Arizona, while Harris was ahead in Michigan. In contrast, polls from the New York Times and Siena College showed that Harris had a slight lead in enough states to win the Electoral College.
Bo-kyung, so there are 93 electoral votes from 7 toss-up states, as our Pakonu has been reporting. 2 states do not take a winner-takes-all approach. Tell us about this in detail.
Sure. So we talked about how a candidate can win this race through the system called the Electoral College. But two states do not follow this winners-take-all system, but instead allows electoral votes to be split, and they are Nebraska and Maine. Now, in Nebraska, 2 of 5 electoral votes go to the winner of the statewide vote, and the rest of the electoral vote goes to the winner in each of Nebraska's 3 congressional districts. Now, Nebraska is largely a red state, but the swing district around Omaha, the state's largest city, is called the Blue Dot, as it went blue for the first time in 2008, voting for former President Barack Obama, and then went blue again for President Joe Biden in 2020. Now in Maine, 2 of 4 electoral votes go to the statewide winner and 2 go to the winners in each of the 2 congressional districts. Maine is a Democratic stronghold, but the 2nd congressional district, where 72% is rural, is known as a red dot, with Republican-leaning voters having supported Trump in both the 2016 and 2020 elections.
Of course, we will have to closely look at these states as well. Thank you, Bo-kyung, for the report.
Thank you.
Now, the result of the U.S. presidential race will have implications that go beyond its borders. That being said, our foreign affairs correspondent Yoon takes a look at the prospects of partnership between Seoul and Washington, as well as their efforts to ease tensions on the Korean peninsula under a new U.S. leadership.
The 2 candidates, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump, have starkly differing views on how to share the cost for American troops stationed in Korea. In an op-ed to South Korean local media, Harris said the alliance between Seoul and Washington has been a linchpin of security and prosperity, while noting that South Korea is already paying sizable contributions to have American troops in the country. Last month, the 2 countries reached a deal on this issue after going through 5 months of negotiation. Whereas Harris will likely stick to this agreement, Trump has hinted at an attempt to renegotiate, saying Washington cannot be taken advantage of any longer in military and trade. He's been insisting that Seoul should be paying $10 billion a year, describing South Korea as a money machine. Many experts say that South Korea needs to be prepared for renegotiation should Trump take office again.
So, I think that we could definitely see an attempt to renegotiate the special measures agreement. That could cause alliance friction. I think that we could see a Trump administration attempt to try to repurpose the USFK, so the U.S. Forces Korea, to be postured more flexibly to deal with regional contingencies. And by that, one mostly understands a potential problem.
The 2 candidates also plan to take notably different approaches on how to deal with North Korea. Experts suggest that if Harris wins, we will see the new administration focus on strengthening relations with allies and partners to address nuclear threats from North Korea.
For Harris, denuclearization of North Korea remains the ultimate goal, but what's more important is working with allies to deter the North. So she will continue to focus on strengthening deterrence against North Korea's nuclear program by reassessing and enhancing cooperation with allied nations.
But a second Trump presidency could pose a significant risk for South Korea.
Trump will likely try to manage the North Korean nuclear crisis through a top-down diplomacy with Kim Jong-un. Going further, there is a possibility that he may recognize North Korea as a nuclear-armed state and partially or fully lift sanctions, initiating a nuclear arms reduction negotiation. This could potentially become a significant risk factor for South Korea.
However, both the Democratic and Republican parties have removed the term CVID, or Complete Verifiable Irreversible Denuclearization, in their new policy platforms. While it is too early to say that this fully reflects the new administration's policies, it raises speculation that the U.S. government may be shifting its priorities away from North Korea. The South Korean government says it's ready to respond appropriately, regardless of the outcome of the election. 배은지, Arirang News.
North Korea test-fired a round of short-range ballistic missiles into the East Sea this morning. Our correspondent Kim Jong-sil has the details.
The South Korean military has condemned North Korea's recent provocations, labeling them as despicable and warning that such actions will only isolate the regime further, effectively turning it into a, quote, harsh prison. On Tuesday morning, North Korea fired several short-range ballistic missiles into the East Sea, launched from the Sariwon area in Hwanghae-bukdo province at around 7:30 a.m. The missiles traveled approximately 400 kilometers in what was North Korea's second missile test in just 5 days, following the launch of the new Hwasong-19 intercontinental ballistic missile on Thursday.
These missile launches are a blatant disregard for UN Security Council resolutions and pose a significant threat, escalating tensions on the Korean peninsula. We will once again warn that North Korea will bear full responsibility for the consequences of their actions.
Tuesday's missile launch followed joint air drills by South Korea, the U.S., and Japan over the weekend. In response, Kim Yo-jong, the sister of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, warned that these drills pose a serious threat to North Korea and highlight the need for the regime to enhance its defense capabilities.
These launches are a direct response to recent joint air drills by South Korea, the US, and Japan, while also signaling North Korea's presence ahead of the US presidential election.
Professor Kim Jae-chun of Seogang University adds that these provocations may also be intended to influence the election.
This is to remind the U.S. of the fact that they are still a power to be reckoned with, and maybe to help Donald Trump a little bit in this tight race to have a nuclear arms reduction talk with Donald Trump if Donald Trump goes back to the White House.
He added that Pyongyang may also want to show its military readiness despite recently sending troops to Russia. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
South Korea's defense ministry says some 10,000 North Korean troops have arrived in Russia to support its war against Ukraine. In a press briefing on Tuesday, the defense ministry spokesperson said a significant number of the troops are believed to be in frontline areas, including Kursk. But when asked about a South Korean media report saying that as many as 40 North Korean soldiers had been killed on the battlefield, he said he had no information. The remarks come hours after the Pentagon said that there are at least 10,000 North Korean soldiers near the Ukraine border, but said it cannot confirm reports that they were engaged in combat. Shifting gears, inflation stayed within the 1% range last month, noting its slowest momentum in some 4 years. Prices of vegetables, however, have shot up. Lee Soo-jun has numbers.
Consumer prices in South Korea showing signs of stabilizing, with inflation remaining in the 1% range for the second straight month in October. Data released by Statistics Korea on Tuesday showed that the country's consumer price index, a key gauge of inflation, rose 1.3% compared to the same month the previous year. The on-year rise is also the lowest seen since January 2021. The rise in consumer prices had been in the 2% range since April, before dropping to 1.6% in September. The slowing of inflation last month was mainly driven by the cost of petroleum products falling 10.9% on year, marking the sharpest drop in 15 months.
The drop in prices of petroleum and fruit products was greater, lowering the rise in consumer prices in October 2024 by 0.3 percentage points from the previous month to 1.3% on year.
Fruit prices fell more than 10% on year in October, with apple prices plunging 20%. But overall prices of agricultural, livestock, and fisheries products were up 1.2% on year. Vegetables in particular saw a sharp rise, jumping 15.6% compared to the same month the year before, the highest seen since October 2022. Key ingredients of kimchi, an important staple of Korean cuisine, remained high, with prices of Napa cabbages up 51.5% on year and radishes up 52.1%. To address the high prices, the first Vice Minister of Economy and Finance at a Vice Ministerial Economic meeting on Tuesday said that the government will carry out measures to stabilize vegetable prices.
The supply of Napa cabbages will go up 10% compared to the previous year to 24,000 tons. And starting from October 24, there were discounts of up to 40% on cabbages and radishes to alleviate the burden on consumers.
The Bank of Korea, which also held a meeting on Tuesday to evaluate prices, assessed that while prices are stabilizing, consumer price inflation may return to the 2% range towards the end of the year due to base effect from low oil prices at the end of last year, as well as a result of the U.S. election. 이수진, Arirang News.
Exports of the Korean agri-food business have reached a record high thanks to a K-food craze in many other countries. According to the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, the exports of Korean agri-food from January until October this year were up by almost 9% from a year earlier, reaching some $8.2 billion. The export value of processed rice, instant noodles, and snacks recorded $250 million, up by 41.9%. Ramyeon was listed on the top among the items. On the local front, a public presidential address and a press conference will be held this coming Thursday to share the administration's policy gains, as well as a host of allegations raised by the opposition party. Our correspondent Woo Soo-young reports.
President Yoon Suk-yeol will deliver a public address and press conference at 10 a.m. this Thursday as he marks the midpoint of his presidency this week. A senior presidential official said Monday that the South Korean leader will explain what he's achieved so far and the direction of his policies in the remainder of his term. This will be Yoon's first press conference in about 2.5 months since the end of August. The format will likely follow the same structure as his most recent press conference, with the president delivering a national address first, followed by a Q&A session with reporters. According to the senior aide, Yoon will address all questions regarding matters of public interest. This could well include recent allegations that he and First Lady Kim Gon-hee may have interfered in party politics in 2022. The opposition party last month leaked a recorded phone call between Yoon and Myung Tae-gyun, an obscure political consultant, during which they discussed the ruling party's candidate selection process ahead of a by-election. Initially, the presidential office was leaning towards holding the press conference around the end of the month, following Yoon's diplomatic engagements, but the leader reportedly took his aide's advice to make a public address before his overseas trip. It appears the date was moved up after Yoon's approval ratings dropped below 20% last week, and the opposition steps up its offensive against First Lady Kim, vowing to pass a bill mid-month to launch a special investigation against her. Throughout his term, Yoon has been targeted with various accusations surrounding his wife's alleged misconduct and influence over his administration and personnel. His office has expressed hope that the upcoming press conference will bring clarity through Yoon's comprehensive explanations to the public. As he marks the halfway point of his term, the president's tone and rhetoric on Thursday could mark an inflection point in the domestic political landscape. Woo Soo-young, Arirang News.
Elsewhere, a volcanic eruption on the Indonesian island of Flores has killed at least 10 people and left thousands evacuated from their homes. The eruption at Mount Lewotobi Laki-laki happened on Sunday night and continued to see small explosions on Monday night. Scorching lava headed to nearby villages, burning houses and infrastructure. The number of deaths may increase as the search and rescue process continues. The volcano erupted for the first time in 20 years last December and continued to see eruptions early this year.
This morning was the coldest this fall in the central parts of the country. Although it's an unofficial figure, some places in central inland areas were at below zero, with temperatures in Panmunjom near Paju, Gyeonggi-do province, falling to minus 0.7 degrees Celsius. According to official records, Cheoron in Gangwon-do province fell to 1.9 degrees, and Gangwon-do Island in Incheon to 3.7 degrees. Until tonight, the East Coast will be cloudy with 5 to 20 millimeters of rain. In the mountainous areas of Gangwon-do province, where temperatures are low, about 2 centimeters of snow has already accumulated. Please be careful with slippery roads. Tomorrow, Seoul and Gyeongju will start off at 4 degrees, Busan 8 degrees. Highs will move up to 12 degrees in Chuncheon, Busan and Jeju 16 degrees. This cold will gradually ease off with temperatures recovering from the weekend. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world. And that is Newscenter for tonight. Thanks for watching. A panel session coming up.
천혜의 자연관광지와 이순신 장군의 충절의 정신이 공존하는 경상남도에서 푸르드 경남 2014 스페셜 대회가 펼쳐집니다. 약속의 땅, 미래 100년의 도시 통영. 일상이 여행인 그곳, 다정다감 거제. 매력발산 천만 생태 관광도시 국민고향 보물섬 남해. 변화와 혁신을 선도하는 도시 창원. 아름다운 경남 남해안의 관광지를 투어하는 푸르드 경남 스페셜 대회에 여러분의 많은 관심 바랍니다.
How to survive in Korea. Barbecue restaurants. Step 1. Taking care of your clothes. Put your jacket in the plastic bag. Seal it tight. If the stool flips open, store your clothes inside. Wearing light colors? Grab an apron. It's the best defense against oil splatter and smoke. Step 2. Bottomless side dishes. Basic side dishes at a barbecue restaurant. Eat, and eat as much as you want. Side dishes come with free refills. Oh, and if you don't see this sign, just ask, 사장님, 여기 밑반찬 좀 더 주세요. Simple, isn't it? Step 3. Grilling meat. There are various kinds of samgyeopsal in Korea. Place the meat on the grill. Turn it over when golden. And again when it looks done. Again and again and again. Step 4. Sam style. You aren't taking bites of sam like a taco, are you? In Korea, we have it in one bite. A pro tip here. Add only as much as you can handle in a bite. Gotta avoid awkward situations. Step 5. Enjoy the perks. After the meal, enjoy the perks offered at a Korean restaurant. Fabric refreshers get rid of the barbecue smell, while mint candies freshen your breath. Did you survive the barbecue restaurant? Hang on. Are you here with someone you want to impress? Then let's skip the garlic. Who knows what will happen?
Hi, Chef Ryan Phillips here. Today we're going to make gaeseonjuak, or traditional Korean rice donut.
Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring today's most pressing issues into focus. I'm Kim Mo-gen. Today is Election Day, where Americans head to the polls to vote for their next president. The race to elect the 47th president of the United States kicked off hours ago in New Hampshire, and more polls are opening across the country. Both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris need a minimum of 270 electoral votes to secure the presidency, with key battleground states Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin playing a crucial role in determining the winner. Now, with the stakes higher than ever, the world is watching closely to see whether Democratic candidate and current Vice President Kamala Harris will make history as the first female president, or if former Republican President Donald Trump will stage an unprecedented comeback to claim a second term. For the latest on the election situation, we first connect to our Voice of America correspondent, Jessica Stone in Virginia. Thanks for coming on, Jessica.
You bet. It's good to be here.
So, Jessica, Election Day has finally come. It's 8:30 p.m. here in South Korea, and I believe it's around very early hours of 6:30 a.m. in Virginia. I believe polls have opened by now. How's the local atmosphere shaping up?
Well, I got to tell you, we have been here since 3 a.m. local time, and it is now 6:30 local time. And right when the polls opened here in Arlington, Virginia, we saw about 60 people walk right in the door, lined all up. And you can still see even more people in the distance behind that glass door. So there is definitely a lot of enthusiasm here, which is something that the person in charge of the polling location was a little bit surprised at, actually, because there was also a big response here to early voting. I stood in line on Friday for about 20 or 30 minutes outside the polling location before even getting in, just to finish early voting. And we know that about 2 million early votes took place here just in the state of Virginia, close to 80 million nationwide. Here in Virginia, that's about a third of the registered vote. It is less than the 2020 early vote. That is nationwide also the case. About half as many Americans voted early as voted in 2020. Of course, those pandemic restrictions being a huge part of that. But the Harris campaign leads by almost 6 points here in Virginia. So even though this is kind of on the border of being a swing state, it's not a critical swing state. It's certainly not a predictor of the outcome of this election in terms of turnout or the polling location or the polling data. And so we haven't really seen a lot of time spent by the candidates here in the last few hours and days of the campaign.
Right. So it's good to hear that a lot of people were eager to vote from the beginning of when the polling stations have opened. And both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump have ramped up their campaigns up to the final weekend. Do we know where the candidates are right now, and what's the mood like in their camps?
Well, these candidates spent a lot of time in the critical swing state of Pennsylvania in the last hours of the campaign. Kamala Harris and her campaign crisscrossing the states from Pittsburgh on the west to Philadelphia in the east, ending the day on those very iconic rocky steps in the city of brotherly love. She spent virtually the whole day in Pennsylvania, but started it in Michigan, another battleground state. And then Trump, for his part, started in Raleigh, North Carolina, shoring up that vote in North Carolina, which he really needs to win. He won it by less than a percentage point 4 years ago. Been spending 2 more stops in Pennsylvania and finishing the day in Michigan, which is tight for him. It's not terribly likely that he's going to win Michigan, but we'll have to see how the turnout goes. He ended the day in the western part of the state, Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is a more conservative-leaning part of the state. And both of these camps are now back in their respective locations, the Trump campaign back in Florida and the Harris campaign back in the D.C. area. But in terms of the mood of these campaigns, you know, it's been so tight that they are literally watching not only the public polling, which we see, but the internal polling that they get about the results. And so there's definitely the feeling of excitement and concern and great attention to these results as we go forward.
Right. So these candidates have been exerting their best efforts up to the last minute. Now, Jessica, how does the latest election compare to 4 years ago? What do you think about the level of public interest this time around?
There is definitely a lot of enthusiasm and attention to the election. And we saw that in part, even though the early voting numbers weren't as great as they were 4 years ago and in 2020. Part of that can be explained, again, by those restrictions. We did see a surge in rural voting and in Republican early voting. That's largely attributed to the fact that the Republican side of the aisle really encouraged their voters to get out early. And 4 years ago, Donald Trump's message was, don't get out early. You can't trust that vote. You can't trust that process. This time, they did a 180. They turned right around and suggested that their voters get out early. And so we are seeing an early lead in the early voting for Republicans in the battleground states. There is also some fear on the part of Democrats that there will be, 4 years ago, we sort of had the blue mirage where we had a lead on the Democrats going into Election Day. Now that is unlikely to be the case because we have so many early votes from the Republicans. So Obama's former campaign manager, Jim Messina, over the weekend said that it is a little bit scary for the Harris campaign because they're going into this without a lead in the early voting. But again, just to clarify how many rules have changed about how we count this vote, this election cycle. There's been a lot of changes since 4 years ago. There are 3 swing states that are not going to start counting or processing ballots until this morning.
Right, so it's going to be a very tight race until the very last minute. Back in 2020, Jessica, Joe Biden took 4 days to declare victory, largely due to delays in counting ballots in Pennsylvania. What about this time around? When can we expect some clarity on these results?
So the reason I'm talking so much about when the count and when the processing begins is really because that is going to give us some prediction of how long it's going to take. In Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, in Georgia, they do not begin the counting until the polls open of the early vote. So states like Arizona, other states, they have been in Michigan. They have already been counting ahead of time, which means once the polls open, they already have the early vote processed and counted. Processing, by the way, literally means opening the envelope of a mail-in or an absentee ballot, checking that the registration is legitimate, even before you count. So that's an extra layer of the process. Because that is starting late in 3 critical swing states, or later than the other critical swing states, it stands to reason that it could be some days, potentially 4 days or more, before we have an election result, because this is a close election. 48% to 48% between Harris and Trump as we go into the last polling data from the New York Times Siena College poll. This is neck and neck, and turnout is going to be key, and accuracy is going to be key. And you can bet that there's going to be a court challenge or two along the way if there are any issues or concerns about the validity of voters, voter registrations, or any of the counting methodologies that are used today.
All right, Jessica, thank you so much for the updates. We'll connect with you again on Wednesday for more details.
You bet. Good to be with you.
And now, to help us break down the key issues, forecast possible outcomes, and provide a global perspective on what this election could mean for the international community, we are joined in the studio by Min Jung-eun, professor at the Korean National Diplomatic Academy. Professor Min, thank you for coming in.
Good evening.
So, Professor, this election has seen a surge in early voting, like our Jessica mentioned, with over 80 million ballots already being cast. While early voting rates are lower than COVID times, it's still higher than 2016 and 2012, the prior elections. What is driving this increase? And could we still see this high early votes could be of advantage to the Democratic candidate?
Yes, as Jessica mentioned, over 80 million voters already cast their ballots by early voting, and which means that more than half of the voters voted through early voting this year. So I think that for the outcome of the election, it will be very important which party supporters cast their ballots by early voting more than the other party supporters like their counterparts. As you mentioned, 4 years ago, in terms of the COVID-19 restrictions, more than 100 million voters cast their ballots by early voting. And in the past, the early voting rate was high among Democratic Party supporters, but this could not be the case this year because the Republican Party, Trump camp strongly encouraged their supporters to come out to vote early because they realize that the early voting is very important for the result of the election. So, I think that the Republican Party supporters responded to the call from the Trump camp. So there is a report that in some states, in terms of the early voting, there seems to be a little difference in the ratio of Democratic and Republican Party supporters among early voting participants. Specifically, the outcome of the early voting in 26 states showed that the party affiliation of early voting participants was 37.9% for the Democratic Party and 36% for the Republican Party. So, which means that just the 1.9% difference between the two party supporters. So I think that the advantage that Democratic Party has got in terms of early voting rate seems to be smaller this year, but still the early voting favors the Democratic Party. And the actual outcome of the early voting this year, we will see the actual result when the ballot boxes are opened.
Right, of course, but we still see a slight 1-point-something% for the Democratic Party's advantage. Now, Professor, as we're speaking, voters are heading to the polling stations in America. When do exit polls actually get released, and how much do you think they could help us predict the winner?
Well, as you know, America has got the 4 different time zones. And in terms of different time zones, they have the different polling closing times in terms of the Eastern and the Midwest and the West or something like that. And interestingly, unlike unlike South Korea, in the United States, people don't care about that kind of a different closing time and when the exit polls will be revealed to the public, because right after each time zone finishes their vote, the CNN and other U.S. media just broadcast the results of the exit polls to the public. So, for example, when the voting is closed in the Eastern States, East Coast states, then the U.S. media just broadcast which candidates could be win by the kind of which margin of vote. It's like a live broadcast, but still other parts of the United States still voting ongoing. So it's very interesting, but they don't care about that. So anyway, the exit polls show the accurate elections, but this year we got the higher rates of the early voting, so it would not be easy to grab the early voting participants the voter choices through the exit polls. So there are the pros and cons about the accuracy of the exit polls this time. So we will see whether the exit polls, the projection would be going well with the actual election outcome. So that would be another challenge that the polling companies have been facing.
Right. Now, Professor, we've talked about this just a while ago. Both candidates have been continuing their campaigns up to the last minute. But alongside Pennsylvania, both Trump and Harris have also focused on North Carolina, which is also seen as a key battleground. Why are analysts now seeing North Carolina as a crucial late battleground?
It is mainly dependent on the voter calculation. among the 7 battleground states. As you know, there are 7 battleground states in this election. Among them, there are 3 Rust Belt the battleground states like Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, and the 4 Sun Belt states, including North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. And on average, in terms of the polling results, it seems that Harris is leading the polls for the 3 Rust Belt states, the Rust Belt states and Nevada, and the Trump is ahead in the polls for the remaining 3 Sun Belt states. So in order to win the election, each candidate needs to receive 270 the college votes, and except the 7 battleground states, Harris is expected to receive 226 college votes, and while Trump is expected to get 219 college votes among the safer states. Then if we suppose that Harris wins the 4 states, the 3 Rust Belt states and Nevada, then she will receive 276. And while Trump, 262. Then Harris will win the election. But suppose that Trump wins the 3 Sun Belt states and Pennsylvania, and then he will get 281 college votes. Then he will win. So Pennsylvania is still the most important state for Harris' victory. But if she loses in Pennsylvania, and she still needed to win the election, then she needed to make up the loss from another state. So suppose that if Harris wins Wisconsin, Michigan, and Nevada, and she will get 257 college votes. It means that she needed to get 13 more college votes to win the election. Then she needed to win North Carolina or Georgia, which each state has got 16 electoral college votes, respectively. And the recent polls show that Harris shows a better performance in North Carolina than Georgia. So I think the experts consider North Carolina as a crucial last game battleground state in vote calculation for the election victory. Pennsylvania first and North Carolina.
Right. Thank you so much for the clear explanation and calculation, Professor. Now, Professor, one of the key factors in voting preferences of white women are very important at this time. We have been hearing of the term shy Trump in the past, but can you explain to us about the background of hidden Harris and shy Trump votes? How significant would they be?
Well, as you know, we got the shy Trump from the 2016 presidential election. At that time, some Republican Party supporters weren't sure if it would be acceptable to publicly express that they supported Trump. It's mainly because, as you know, Trump was not one of the typical presidential candidates, Republican candidates who was fit for the Republican Party's presidential nominee. So they were reluctant. They were reluctant to expressing their vote intention publicly, but they actually cast their ballots for Trump on election day. The studies show that about 93 or 94% of the Republican supporters voted for Trump on election day. But they got some kind of time, the lapse or gap between their vote intention and their voter choice. So I think that we are witnessing another shy Trump situation on the opposite side, the Democratic side, called hidden Harris in 2024, this year. As you know, Harris unexpectedly became the Democratic Party's presidential nominee after Biden dropped out of the race. Then the Democratic Party supporters did not have enough information and confidence about her. But most Democratic Party supporters decided to support her. But still, there are some supporters needed more time before they make up their minds. So I think that this year, Republican Party supporters completed finished their support for Trump earlier than Harris, the supporters. So we saw that Trump got a surge in the polls about 2 weeks ago, while Harris needed a little bit more time before her party supporters complete or finish their support for Harris. So personally, I think that we have more hidden Harris than shy Trump this year. So key factor for this election is whether hidden Harris supporters would actually come out to vote on election day. That will make a huge difference.
Right, so hidden Harris supporters could be a key factor in deciding the winner of the elections. Now, Professor, among many issues that could be factors that could influence the elections, the economy, is a major talking point at this time. Considering the economic climate at this time around, which candidate do you believe has an advantage considering the current situation, economic situation?
For economy, still Trump, I think. The public opinion polls show that voters perceive that Trump would be better in handling economy and immigration, while Harris would be better in dealing with the abortion and democracy. As you know, during this presidential campaign, Trump highlighted the Biden government's policy failures, such as high inflation and cost of living, and the southern border crisis. And he argued that he would be better in dealing with those issues based on what he did when he was in the White House. Meanwhile, Harris emphasized that she would be different from President Biden, and she proposed for the economy, the opportunity economy, to strengthen the middle class. She also argued that she would be tougher to resolve the southern border crisis. In terms of the Harris, the active campaign, the voters' perception about who would be better in dealing with the economy, the gap between the two candidates, I think, has been the smaller toward the election day, but still I think the Trump got some advantage in terms of the issue of economy than Harris.
Right, so now the gap has been narrowed down as the election came forward. Now, yes, Professor, I'm afraid we will have to leave our discussion here. We're running out of time. We have more questions prepared for you. We will have to call you again. Professor, thank you so much for your insights tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in next time again as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.
Completely new